Welcome everyone. My name is Akani Zusho and I am the Interim Dean of the Graduate School of Education. I really do appreciate you taking time to join us today in what I am sure will be an intellectually rich as well as practical conversation about how to conduct equity-minded research. I did want to first talk some about logistics. As you can see, we have a Q&A function as well as a chat function, and I want to make this as interactive as possible despite the webinar format. So as you have questions or comments, please use both of those functions to submit questions to us. We do request, however, that you keep the chat respectful at all times. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I did want to share a little bit of my thinking as to why this lecture now. As many of you know, we at Fordham have a shared mission and vision to make the world a better place. And we do this through our service, through our teaching, but also through our scholarship and our research. And in my own work, looking at the intersection of culture, race, motivation, and self-regulated learning, my goal has always been to conduct the type of research that students and their teachers would find meaningful. Studies that ultimately could help ensure that students, no matter their identities, feel like they matter and that they're learning really deep and important things in school so that they too can make this world an even more just and caring place. But in doing this work, I quickly came to realize how hard it is to do this work well. It is really hard to design research studies that would really be considered anti-racist. How do you conduct a study that addresses the root causes of inequity and not just its manifestation? And how do you ensure that you don't inadvertently promote a deficit narrative or disconscious racism when designing and writing up your study? What is critical race theory and how might I actually apply it in my research? This is where tonight's featured speaker comes in. I have long admired Dr. DeQueer Gumpy, and I can tell you that she has had a profound impact on my own scholarship. There are some articles that are just transformative and really open your eyes. And for me, that was her 2014 article in the top tier journal, Educational Psychologist, where she really talked about the importance of conducting more race-based research. So when I decided, in line with Fordham's strategic plan on educating for justice, that I really wanted the spring lecture to focus on research methods, in particular anti-racist research methods, it was really easy for me to think about who to invite. And let me just say how delighted I was that Dr. DeQueer Gumpy accepted my invitation. So let me tell you a little bit more about her. Dr. DeQueer Gumpy received her PhD in educational psychology from the University of Georgia in 2003, incidentally the same year I received my degree, and is currently a professor of educational psychology and head of the Department of Teacher Education and Learning Sciences at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. In addition, she serves as a faculty mentor with the Interinstitutional Carolina Consortium for Human Development at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and is a former associate editor of the American Educational Research Journal. She is a gifted scholar and instructor, having been recognized with numerous awards, including the NC State University Faculty Scholar Award and the Alumni Outstanding Educator Award. Her most recent book is Understanding Critical Race Research Methods and Methodologies, Lessons from the Field, co-edited with Drs. Thandika Chapman and Paul Schutz. Dr. DeQueer Gumpy's program of research focuses on three areas: race and racial identity, including critical race theory, research methods with an emphasis on mixed methods, and emotions and education. She explores how issues of race and racism, often using a critical race theory lens, impact African Americans across the lifespan and in various educational contexts. In addition, as a practical and applied methodologist, she examines the research process, teaching others how to utilize specific methodological approaches. And today she'll be talking to us about the importance of critical race mixed methodologies when conducting work on African American students. It is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Jessica DeQueer Gumby, to the Fordham community. Please join me in giving her a very warm welcome. Dr. DeQueer Gumby, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Erin Dean Zusho. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you so much for the very warm welcome. So today I am going to talk to you about, as Dean Zusho talked about, critical race mixed methodology, and my talk is exploring experiences of African American students using critical race mixed methodology. This is something I've just been working with most recently, so it's not something that's completely ironed out in terms of this is exactly, 100% what you actually have to do, but it's more of a process and something that I am developing. But I want to give you some general guidelines about what it is and what it looks like, and hopefully give you some, help motivate you to maybe go out in the field and engage in some of this work on your own. So when I get started, I want to talk to you a little bit about, okay, here it is. Not going. Wait a minute. There it is. There it is. I'm sorry. The auto presentation. I want to talk to you a little bit about holistically what I want to talk to you today. So I'm going to focus first on positionality and racialized positionality, because I think it's really important to give you context of kind of where I'm coming from and why this work is important. Then we'll go into a little bit about critical race theory, mixed methods research, so you can understand the foundation of what critical race mixed methodology is about, and then talk about critical race mixed methodology, provide some examples of critical race mixed methodology, provide a discussion of benefits and challenges, give you some questions to consider, provide some kind of words of wisdom as you kind of go out into the world and engaging in this kind of work. And then I'll leave some time for questions, and hopefully we have some really good questions to answer. So when we talk about positionality, this is how researchers' multiple cultural identities, race, gender, sexuality, religion, kind of just all in general of who you are, and your biases influence the way you look at the world. So basically, everything about who you are, all of your experiences impact, help to define and determine your positionality. And all those things together influence who you are as a researcher. It influences your inquiry worldview. That's the worldview you take when you're actually looking at and engaging in a research study. So it influences the research questions that you ask, the type of participants that you want to look at, the context in which you want to situate your work. So everything about the research study, just everything from top to bottom, is influenced by your positionality, but also influences your whole program of research. So everything that you actually want to study and the way you want to study it, the kind of questions you want to study, the kind of methods you choose to use are all influenced by your positionality. And so every little bit about your experiences impact kind of who you are as a researcher. So it's really important to understand kind of where you stand and kind of what got you what got you there, and how your gender experiences may impact on who you are, how your experiences with religion or socioeconomic status may impact who you are, and of course how your racial experiences may impact who you are and the way you think and the kind of questions that you ask. And so we have racialized positionality. And racialized positionality is how researchers' positionality is based upon your racialized life and your educational experiences as a person of color. Not necessarily, you can't have a racialized positionality as someone who's white, but particularly I'm talking about me as an African American. It's about my experiences as an African American. So my racialized positionality is all about the experiences I have had as an African American woman. I'm an African American woman that has been born and raised in the South. I'm from Louisiana, as the Zusho talked to you about. I did my graduate work at the University of Georgia, so I lived in Georgia, and now I work at North Carolina State University. I'm in North Carolina, so I am a Southerner through and through. So my racialized positionality has a lot to do with my being an African American woman in the South. And so a lot of my experiences and the questions I ask and the research questions I ask and the studies I do are largely influenced about being this person, this Southern Black woman in the South. And that largely kind of shapes the way, it shapes my life, but it shapes the way the way I see research and the kind of questions I ask and the way I frame my studies. So let me give you a little more information about some of my racialized positionality. Um, Growing up, for my family, I grew up in Louisiana. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in South Louisiana. And I don't know if any of you all, Baton Rouge is about an hour west of New Orleans, just to give you a little context, a little geography. And so South Louisiana, heavily French influenced. And I have Creole heritage for both my parents, my dad's side and my mom's side. And so in Louisiana, race is a very interesting thing. So Creoles are kind of the combination of Black, white, um, Native American, and so race is always really central to my whole experience. It's from a little girl. So I had interracial issues, interracial experiences, but then intraracial experiences. And so intraracial meaning experiences within the Black community, but then also interracial experiences growing up. Between white and Black, experiences in South Louisiana. I'm talking in terms of Black and white in Louisiana because at the time it was largely just Black and white. We didn't have a lot of experience with other groups, particularly at the time. But also, I grew up. My personal experiences. I grew up Catholic. I was raised Catholic in South Louisiana, and I went to a mostly predominantly white Catholic church. And so I always noticed and saw very few people look like me. But at the same time, at school, I went to schools in elementary school. My school was mostly Black, but I went to a racially mixed middle and high school. And so my friends were largely mixed. But I probably had more Black friends. And so personal experience, it had mixed racial experiences. But then when I went to higher education, I went to Louisiana State University, a predominantly white institution. I was a psychology and a Spanish major. Now, in psychology, I rarely saw anybody that looked like me. None of the professors looked like me. There were no faculty of color in the psychology department at LSU. There still aren't any faculty of color in the psychology department at LSU. That is, decades later. But in the Spanish department, I saw a lot of people of color there because these were native Spanish speakers. There were people from Uruguay, Venezuela, from Spain, from Mexico. So I saw a lot of people of color, and I felt a sense of home and sense of connection and belonging there because there were other people of color there. But then I moved to Athens, Georgia, to go to the University of Georgia. That was a totally different perspective. That was a totally different context because it was a predominantly white institution like LSU was. However, at the time when I moved to Athens, Georgia, um, how can I put it? Georgia, the state flag of Georgia still consisted of having the Confederate flag as a part of the state flag of Georgia. um, you know, s- I saw kids from fraternities and sororities wearing the Confederate flag everywhere. The Confederate flag was flying everywhere. And at LSU, at least, at that time, you know, fraternities, sororities couldn't fly the Confederate flag. And, our state flag had a pelican on it. I mean, those are things and the Confederate flag did not fly at any major state, any major government buildings. And so it was a totally different situation. And so to go to Georgia and see, just see the Confederacy just so, supported, just government sanctioned. And so so racially, that had a huge impact on kind of who I was and kind of how I experienced things. But it was at the University of Georgia when I really started to want to study race. Um, Academically. I'd always experienced race personally, growing up in my family, but I never really experienced, I didn't, but I wanted to actually study race, more so academically once I got to the University of Georgia. And that's when I started to try to understand racial identity, and try to study. I want to study racial identity in terms of African American adolescents' experiences with race and racial identity, and particularly how it may have impacted students' sense of motivation in schools and how students' sense of racial identity may have impacted their academic identity. So basically, how does race really impact students, academic achievement and students, wanting to how students' academic performance. So race and academic performance are things in academic achievement and just academic success in general is basically what I wanted to study. And so in my studies and my reading and reading and reading, I came across a lot of different articles and journals. But I came across one particular reading, and it was on critical race theory. It was by Gloria Ladson Billings and Tate. And so it was, and it just changed my life, because it really helped me to understand all of my racial experiences and the way that I saw the world, and helped me to really crystallize and gave me a framework for how I can use to actually frame my dissertation study. At the time was looking at African American students, and kind of how they negotiated their identity, or kind of how they shaped their identity within the school context. And I was actually studying African American students in an independent school. And so I wanted to really, and all the frameworks I had looked at, they just didn't really capture, really they didn't give me the words, and they didn't give me what I needed to capture what I wanted to look at. But when I found that article by Ladson, Billings, and Tate, that on critical race theory and education, that is what really helped me to solidify and crystallize what I need to look at. So that got my interest in critical race theory. So understanding my racialized positionality, understanding who I was and who I am is really, really central for me understanding the kind of the research questions I ask and why I look at what I look at, and on my journey to critical race theory. But so I started looking at critical race theory, and it's really interesting. Once I got to NC State as a professor, one of my colleagues just happened to be one of Gloria Ladson Billings' students. Her name was Adrienne Dixon, and she and I actually collaborated on a lot of work together. And then I got a little bit more and more involved in the critical race theory arena. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so involved with critical race theory. But I also find that critical race theory is a very useful framework to frame my work. So what is critical race theory? So I've been talking a little bit about it. So critical race theory is a counter-legal scholarship or racial framework that examines the relationships between race, racism, and power. And I think it's really important for you to understand that critical race theory comes from the legal arena. It's based in the legal arena, and the core is in legal works. And so whatever you're doing work in critical race theory, it's important for you to go to the actual legal documents and to read the works of legal scholars, not just the work of, say, education scholars that are using CRT or applying CRT, but it's really important to look at the work of legal scholars. And so goals of CRT include how, in general, how to understand white supremacy and its subordination of people of color, and particularly how it's been created and maintained in America. And so we talk a lot about, white supremacy in this country, but, CRT really wants to understand, how has it been implemented? How has it been able to be maintained and created? But also to understand the relationship between the law. Once again, I'm bringing back, it's all about bringing, CRT is all about the law and racial power, as well as how to change it. So CRT is about understanding and documenting what's going on, but it's also very activist about, okay, so now that we documented everything, how do we make change? CRT it's about social justice. It's about just justice. It's about justice. And how do we make change about whatever context where we have what's going on? And so a key figure, and in fact, the key figure in critical race theory is Derek Bell. And Derek Bell is the founder of critical race theory. And he talked about how racism is an integral, permanent, and indestructible component of this society. Um, and particularly, he mentioned that in his famous book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well. And so key component of critical race theory talks about the permanence of racism. I mean, that is so ingrained in our society, we can't destroy it. But our goal is to remain hopeful and to continue to try to make change. We can't become hopeless and fail to say there's nothing we can do. We always need to continue to try. There's hope and continue to try to change things. And so there are various components of CRT. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, but I just want to tell you that a variety of ways we can look at aspects of CRT. I just mentioned the permanence of racism in society, or the centrality of race and racism, the fact that it has a permanent role. The whole property rights of whiteness, but that looks at white privilege. I think is really important. Another key component is intersectionality, that we look at the intersection of race. And most of the time we talk about race and gender, but it's not just race and gender. It's about the intersection of subordinate identities. Most of the time, if you're going to see racism, you're going to see sexism, you're going to see heterosexism, you're going to see classism, and they almost always intersect. The myth of meritocracy, it challenges the idea that hard work and ability to ensure success. We see a lot of that. You see cronyism all the time. You see nepotism, and we just see just the challenges that the white supremacy, um, the side effects of white supremacy. You see that people can work really hard and still not be successful. Um, One really huge component of a critical race theory is the centrality of experiential knowledge or counter storytelling, is that where we highlight the voices and experience of people of color, and that we challenge the majoritarian perspective, and we allow the voices of those of the of we acknowledge the voices of people of color. So it's really important. um, you know the historical contextual perspective, CRT critical race theories studies often are really situated in social historical context. It's really important to understand the history of the context in which you're studying. So you can't just study the here and now. You also have to acknowledge the history of that particular context and what's going on as to why, and understanding why things may be happening the way they are. And so there are a lot of really good components of CRT. So as you're reading and you're doing your work and you're really interested in CRT, it's really, really, really important for you to understand the various ways in which CRT can be addressed and looked at, in the various works of CRT, and particularly looking at the legal foundations of these different components, and then also looking at how I say education scholars have looked at CRT. You look at these components in education, but also other fields. But people are starting to use CRT in sociology and maybe in public health in different areas. But education has by far been the area that has most used CRT outside of the legal profession. And so, one area, I'm as the Zusha talked to you about, is that, I not only study race and racism, but I also most research methods are also really important to me, particularly mixed methods research. And so one thing I've been looking at, CRT talks a lot, as I talked to you about, as talking about people's stories, particularly counter storytelling. And critical race theory tends to be more qualitative oriented. However, there are some researchers that are kind of challenging that within in the CRT field, and focusing on, we can do CRT work from a quantitative perspective, or even from a mixed methods perspective. And particularly with a mixed methods perspective, you can highlight the quantitative aspects, like challenging some of the 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 dominant narratives by countering some of the statistical analysis, or just being critical of statistical analysis. But also you could highlight stories within mixed methods, because you can have qualitative dominant mixed methods approaches. And so that's one thing, that's one way I have been arguing that we can also have mixed methods approaches to critical race theory, using critical race theory. And so first I want to talk to you a little bit about, when I say mixed methods, what do I mean by that? So mixed methods can be seen as the combining of quantitative and qualitative approaches within one study. And when I say that, it's about combining throughout the whole study. So you're looking at, combining it from research questions to data, data collection, to data analysis, to data interpretation. It's throughout the whole process, even validation and reliability strategies. So it's all about the whole process of your data. But what's really interesting about mixed methods research is that the majority of mixed methods researchers tend to come from a more quantitative stance, or a post-positivist or a positivist kind of stance. And so from that perspective, mixed methods researchers tend to not think about their having a theoretical perspective or whatever, or not even or worldview, because from quantitative perspectives, you don't think about your theoretical lens, or you don't think about your your worldview that you're using to guide your study. And so Schutz et al., so Paul Schutz, myself, and Mika Williams, we came up with a definition for mixed methods that talks about mixed methods inquiry is influenced by one's theoretical perspective and involves the collecting and analyzing of both quantitative and qualitative data within one study, and when applicable are used to address issues of power. Because what's also really interesting about mixed methods research is that oftentimes it's not used from a critical perspective. Most, as I mentioned, most mixed methods researchers are post-positivists, or they may kind of, if they're have more of a qualitative slant, they tend to not be critical researchers. And so, we wanted to have a definition of mixed methods that acknowledge that, you can have this more theoretical, have a strong theoretical framing for your work, but you could also have it from do a more critical perspective and use it to address issues of power. And so I want to go briefly talk about the different kind of mixed methods designs you can have. There are multiple mixed methods designs, but these tend to be the five most common mixed methods designs. And so, if you're really interested in learning more, I highly recommend that you can read, Creswell and Plano Clark has they do a really good job of really simplifying these five designs. But mostly all the major mixed methods textbooks all talk about these five kind of core designs, and then they get into more complicated, kind of hybrid, more detailed designs. I highly recommend, if you are a beginning mixed methods researcher, that you stick to one of these basic designs, because mixed methods designs can be pretty complicated initially, just because there's so much that happens within one design, and that if you're trying to do something more complicated, because you can combine some of these, it could get really complex fast. And so keeping it as simple, as parsimonious as possible, as simple as possible, as would definitely be my advice. The first design, there are some, there are sequential designs, that there are designs that go in order. There are designs that are kind of concurrent, some designs where you collect data at the same time. And then there's some other type designs. So explanatory, the sequential designs are either what we call explanatory or exploratory designs. And these are kind of the more common designs. And explanatory sequential designs in particular is when you first collect your quantitative and then your qualitative data, and it's collected sequentially. And this is when you collect, like, say, a survey, and then you want to collect qualitative data afterwards to kind of maybe follow up on some of the findings you had from your quantitative data, to kind of just maybe enhance, or just to broaden some of the themes that you found from your quantitative data in a smaller qualitative sample. The exploratory sequential is when you start with a qualitative sample, and then you go to a larger quantitative sample. And so once again, this is collected sequentially. And this is kind of like in scale design, when you start off with qualitative data, and then you might use the information to build a quantitative survey, and then you use it to give to a larger sample. Then we have what's called a concurrent parallel or convergent parallel design. And this is when you collect your data simultaneously, and then you merge them. So what happened is that you will collect, you would do like a survey, and then collect interviews basically from the same population. And then you merge the data, merge the findings of the data. Then we have this embedded design. This is kind of, you think about it more like a um, experimental design. We have a pre and post. And so if you could do it where the qual is embedded in the quantitative data. So you can have like a pre and post that's quantitative, and your qualitative is your kind of your intervention that is embedded between that quantitative pre and post. Or you can have a pre and post where you have a qualitative pre and post, where the quantitative is your intervention that's embedded within the qualitative pre and post. So that's called your embedded design. And then you have a multi-phase design, where you go back and forth between qualitative and quantitative components. And this is more of kind of like program development and program evaluation, where you might start off with qualitative, and then you design something, then you evaluate it, then you so you do a repetitive series of qualitative and quantitative. And so you can see all of these different designs have a lot of different stages and methods. And so if you try to combine a whole bunch of these different components, it could get a lot really, really fast. And so I'm not going to go into details about this, but I also in my text, we go into a lot more details about, how you can use any of those particular designs and then, what you use them for. But, they're really, really, really helpful because, for instance, with the explanatory sequential, which the ones I'm going to talk a little bit about today, like you can take the quantitative that you collected. If you get the quantitative first and you follow up with qualitative data, um, you analyze your quantitative findings, and then based upon those findings, you can say, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't expect that, and then you could take the qualitative data to take time to use the qualitative to explore some of those unique findings in more detail. Or like, and then with convergent parallel, it's really, because you're collecting at the same time, it's just, I'm not gonna say it's cost effective. It's a cost effective way, but it is a way for you to kind of, you're going to collect quant and qual data. There's a way for you to kind of collect it all at once, because sequential data takes a lot of time because you have to analyze all the quantitative data or all the data at whatever your first phase is. You have to analyze all of it first before you even get to the second phase. And so convergent parallel is just a little, or is a little easier, and that you just collect it all kind of at one time in terms of you're collecting your quantitative with the qualitative, and then so there are pluses and minuses with that convergent parallel, because you don't get the opportunity to say, well, let me see what my quantitative findings are, and then I can use that to dictate what goes on with my qualitative. You don't have that luxury, but it won't take as much time as it will for the sequential. Because you have to wait until all that quantitative data is collected first. So what is so I'll talk to you a little bit about CRT and then mixed methodology. So for me, so I wanted to combine CRT. So I want to use mixed methodology, but I want to use CRT. So what do I do? Because they aren't necessarily put together all the time. So how do I put them together? Paul Schutz and I, in a chapter um, in the book that Dr. Zusho talked a little bit about. We wrote a chapter in there. We talked about critical race mixed methodology we call CRMM, and we define it as the combination of traditional mixed methods designs with CRT. Those are all the particular designs that we talked about. So it's basically using CRT and intertwining CRT within any one of those particular designs that I just talked about. So it's focusing on using mixed methods designs integrated with a CRT framework. And it integrates CRT throughout all stages of the mixed methods research process. So whichever design you end up picking is going through and weaving in CRT through all those different stages of the research process, from research questions all the way on to data analysis and data interpretation, validity, reliability, all those different things that you look at. And so there are three components of CRMM. The research must center on race. I mean, if you're not focusing on race, you're not going to do critical race mixed methods. You can do mixed methodology, you can do mixed methods all day long, but it's not going to be critical race mixed methods. And the research must be grounded within a CRT framework. You can do a racial study, but just because you're focused on race does not make a critical race theory study. Critical race theory is a very specific study. As I talked about, it's about framed within the legal framework, legal arena is focusing on those central components that I talked to you about. It's starting off with the work of Derek Bell and some others, Richard Delgado, Maya Masuda, Kimberly Crenshaw, Cheryl Harris. A lot of those people. It has to be grounded in that work. But the goal of critical race mixed method is to challenge power structures and to help create change. And so it focuses on issues of race, examines power dynamics, and challenges system inequity. And so it's doing traditional CRT work, but it's also make sure that you're trying to create that change, within whatever system that you're looking at. And so I want to talk to you about a couple of critical race mixed method studies that that I have been working on or have worked on. I have a couple of them up here, but for sake of time, I'm not going to be able to go over all of them. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of them. So this is one. It's a critical race mixed method sequential explanatory study, and once again, it's as a reminder, a sequential explanatory starts off with the quantitative, and then it follows up with the quantitative and then follows it with a qualitative. So this study, we're looking at higher education as a workplace, and we explore the impact of racial microaggressions, racial identity, and coping on job satisfactions for African American educators. And so we were looking at education as K through 12 educators, but and higher education educators, but we didn't have a large enough sample for the K 12, and so we ended up working on just the higher education educators. And that happens sometimes in research as well, that sometimes you don't get that sample size you want, but that's just sometimes that's just what happens, and then you just have to go with what you have. What happened is, this also happens in mixed method studies as well. You can't always publish the quant and the qualitative in one particular study. And so we ended up having to break it up, and we published the quantitative in one study and the qualitative in another study. That's not optimal, but it often happens in mixed methods research. And so that's what we ended up doing. And so we have the quant and qual in two different presentations. Um, so so I'm going to talk to you about the two different ones. And so we have the higher education as a workplace quantitative study. And so we did a regression model that suggested that racial microaggressions and detachment coping significantly predicted a decrease in job satisfaction in higher education. So basically, our researchers, I'm sorry, our higher educators that we were looking at, they experienced a lot of racial microaggression, and they also were experiencing they used a lot of different coping skills, but they detached from the environment. And so from a coping literature, detaching is not is a negative form of coping, because they don't feel like they belong, they're separating from the workplace. And so all the research on coping says that when you detach, that leads to a lot of negative, can potentially lead to a lot of negative repercussions. However, for African Americans who may be experiencing a lot of racism in a particular context, detachment may actually be a, um, a really good coping mechanism. Because if you're in a place where it's highly racist and you experience a lot of racism, detaching from a place, seen as a place that you don't have to belong, and seen as just a place where you just go to work, may actually be a good way to actually be self-protective. And so, looking at our data from a critical race their theory lens allowed us to focus on that interpretation from multiple perspectives. From traditional literature, we looked at it. Okay, detachment is a negative form of coping, but from a critical race theory perspective, we can look at that may actually be self-protective for African Americans. But one other thing we focused on the fact that even when highly educated in high paying jobs, such as university professors and researchers, because we had a very high SES group in our study, African Americans experience racial microaggressions. So it really doesn't matter the context, African Americans still experience racial microaggressions. And this is reflective of the CRT component, the centrality or the permanence of racism that I talked to you about, that Derek Bell talked about, and that racism exists in power structures within all education contexts. And so, so we have people, experiencing, racism, and it impacted their coping, the ability to cope, and also impacted their job satisfaction. And we also, I don't have, we also had that African American women in particular, actually were more likely to experience racial microaggressions as well. My sample had more Black women in there. I want to put that out there, but we saw the intersectionality was the issue for as well. And so intersectionality issues. So what was it about the workplace that race and gender was an issue? But in the qualitative follow up, we once again we talked to our participants about, we did a subsample from people who actually took the survey, and we explored racial microaggressions, racial identity, and coping, and job satisfaction, and we confirmed the quantitative findings, and they've experienced a variety of racial microaggressions. They told all sorts of stories. And we saw, the centrality of racism in their stories. And we saw issues of, we saw examples of coping. We saw a lot of examples of whiteness as property, as I told you about. So the whole white privilege came out. We saw examples of intersectionality, and so we saw a lot of the CRT themes that in this in the in their stories. And so by using the critical race mixed methods perspective, we were able to see to see to see a fuller version of kind of what exactly happened with their particular experiences. Now, it would have, of course, been better had we been able to publish the study in one particular publication, but we weren't necessarily able to do so. Okay, my screen just froze on me, so I can't seem to. Okay, now it's letting me go. I'm sorry. And so my second study I was going to go into. That we did a concurrent parallel study. We did in one study, it was one student's dissertation, but she looked at racial identity, science self-efficacy, and science achievement at African American science majors at historically Black colleges and universities. And she did path analysis and interviews. And so with that, we were able to see, you know particularly just quickly, particularly how the centrality of racism, particularly the difficulty students kind of saw. They felt that they had a strong sense of self-efficacy, but they saw the difficulty it was achieving with being scientists in terms of being Black in these white spaces. And so what our path analysis kind of showed that, yeah, they were achieving, but their sense of racial identity became a little bit nuanced because they had strong racial identity, but their sense of racial identity had to kind of change based upon the context. And so we're able to see that because of using critical race theory also with mixed methods, and that we had the quantitative and the qualitative data to look at it, and our qualitative data confirmed our quantitative data. So I'm going to skip that last study because I want to make sure I get through a couple of things and have time for questions. And so benefits versus challenges. A lot of benefits of using this perspective. It allows us to center race in mixed methods. So although mixed methods researchers, there are growing amount of mixed methods research and education, but still we don't focus a lot of race using mixed methods approaches. But then also we're expanding methodology in CRT research. As I mentioned earlier, most CRT researchers use qualitative approaches. And so by using critical race mixed methodologies, we are expanding how we look at CRT. CRT, we can definitely, continue to expand our qualitative approaches in CRT, but I think it's going to be important for the field of CRT to expand beyond qualitative methodology. And then data integration oftentimes centers on the qualitative perspective. And so it's really important to focus on ways to better integrate the quantitative and qualitative perspective in terms of mixed methods research. And so, it's really important for us to see how well the quant and the qual data actually, how well do they corroborate, or can they actually can challenge each other. And so they could be paradoxical. And so it's really important to us to figure out, well, how do we kind of integrate that data? And critical race mixed methodology and using CRT allows us to do a really good job of integrating data. The challenges is IRB approval, particularly with sequential data. It takes a long time sometimes, you have to analyze all your quant data before you get to your qualitative data, and you may not know what questions you want to ask for your qualitative component. And so IRB can be a challenge. Finding participants can be a challenge because you have to do, there's a lot you may be asking your participants to do. And sometimes, it's just difficult and it's difficult to get people to do race research. And so that's really hard. And then we still have people who have preferences for, different methodological approaches. Some people are just like, I'm a quant researcher and that's what I do. And some people are still like, I'm a qualitative researcher and that's what I do. And so it's, so we still have to keep on, in some ways, trying to convince people that mixed methods is a legitimate way for us to actually do research. There's a few challenges out there. So there are some questions I want you to consider. So as you consider this work, think about how you can use CRT in your work and why a CRT framework would be useful. Similarly, how can you use mixed methods in your work? And which particular design I talked about may be most useful to address your research questions. And maybe a mixed methods approach may not be the best. Maybe a simple quant approach or a qual approach, singular qual approach or single quantitative approach might be the best. And then how can a critical race mixed methods framework enhance your research? And how does your research design address the three requirements that I talked about? Are you focusing on race? Are you using critical race theory? And then, is your work addressing power, and inequity, and with the idea that you want to make change? And so how are you doing those three things? And then, so I'm going to leave you with some words of advice. Regardless of what you end up doing, whether you're going to use critical race theory or mixed methods or whatever, become proficient in research methods. So whether you're using qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods, make sure you take all the courses you can take while you're graduate students. Take all the workshops you can take. Make sure you learn all that you can learn. To take advantage of all the resources that you have. If you have speakers coming in like myself, go to all of these talks, because you're going to learn so much from just hearing and experiencing from others. Take a critical race theory course. I don't know if you have one offered at your university, but if not, sometimes there are short courses like an AURA or other kind of research places. So I think it's really important for you to understand CRT from some of the experts, and so that's going to really be really important. Read the critical research literature from various disciplines, including the law. So it's really important for you to get into the literature, read the original sources. You should always read the original sources, regardless of whether it's CRT or not. But read the original sources, but then also read some of the work from all the different places that are doing CRT work. And then once you start ready to do your own work, ask critical questions and difficult questions. Don't be afraid to do that. And be committed to exploring race and systems of oppression. This work is really challenging. I'm really connected to this work because I'm connected to I'm connected to the African American community. This work means a lot to me personally. But regardless of your positionality or why you may come to do this work, you need to be committed to exploring this work, because you may get attacked from people. People may, or it may even be that kind of level of attack. It may just be people may keep questioning you as to why you're doing the work, and you have to remain committed from those outside questions or outside attacks. We critical race theory is literally being attacked by people in government. So you have to be able to withstand that kind of level of scrutiny. And if you're not committed, you're definitely not going to be able to withstand that. So be committed to exploring race and systems of oppression. So even if you're not studying race, if you're studying gender or sexuality or any other systems of oppression, you have to be committed, because it's not going to be an easy road. And that's all I have. So hopefully you have some questions, and I would love to be able to answer for you.
Thank you, Jessica. Maybe we could, well, yes, there are definitely a lot of questions.
Oh, sure.
So first and foremost, people are very much interested in your slide deck.
Okay.
And you are wondering, in addition to getting the recording, if you would be so kind as to, distributing your PowerPoint presentation to them.
Sure.
Okay. So that's the first question.
Sure.
But kind of building on that, and just finding your presentation really helpful. Wait, should I stop sharing the screen?
I can stop sharing.
Okay. Well, in terms of the recommendations, one of your points being is that we should read original sources, right? And that we should really read the work on critical race theory. So who are your favorites and where should we start?
Yeah, oh wow, that's so many people. I think one of the best people you can read is actually just read from the original, and that's Derek Bell.
Mm,
I mean, he actually, and that's even once a book called a Derek Bell Reader. I mean, and it has some of his, some of the pieces they have in there are truncated,
okay.
but they have a lot of his really good work. They actually have some of his count his stories. He actually has characters he's created, and you can read the stories, over time, because in the legal field, it's about stories. I mean, I'm reading, I've been watching, unfortunately, the Derek Chauvin trial, and so what do? They get people on the stand to tell stories. People are moved by stories. You're not moved by numbers, you're moved by stories. And so that's what, CRT is largely about, is telling these other stories. And you have to support it by historical data and stuff, but it's all about the storytelling. And so Derek Bell, his work, he tells a story, but Richard Delgado is another good one. He tells the stories. Kimberly Crenshaw, particularly if you're interested in intersectionality and a lot more women's issues, she is a great person to read. And she talks about her character. Her character's name Geneva Crenshaw, I want to say. And so she has her character she creates, and you can read her character. So there's a lot of really good people, but I would definitely say start off with Derek Bell, and definitely, if you're really interested in intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw is a really good person to read too.
So just kind of building on that, we shouldn't stop at Gloria Latson's Billings and
Oh no, they're really good people to read once they got to education.
uh-huh.
But Gloria Lesson Bill and Bill Tate first
Yeah.
brought that work to
Right.
education. So they kind of translated the work to education. So I'm definitely always read Gloria Lesson Billings work. I mean, I'm never saying don't read her work, but but you want to make sure you read the work that she read as well.
I hear that point. So I also have a couple of other questions. One, you talked a lot about, the difficulties of publishing your studies, right, in one journal. And one of the students, Narissa, wants you to elaborate a little bit more about what challenges you faced. Her question specifically is, can you elaborate a bit on your comment related to not being able to publish both your quant and qual parts of your mixed methods study together?
I mean, it was simple. It wasn't nefarious. It was just space. It was just space. And sometimes, you just, it was a quality call. It was like, do I try to truncate all of this to put it in a one study so I could say I had a mixed method study, or do I separate this to two different studies, two different papers, and really be able to flesh both of them out to the way I really want it to be?
Mm,
Because if I had put the qualitative, into that and made it a mixed method study, I wouldn't have been able to elaborate on the voices as much as I would have wanted to. So sometimes when you do those mixed methods pieces, you're going to have space to really undo that. And if you're not going to have that space, it's going to be a really hard call. Something's going to have to give.
yeah, for sure.
And but I think that's an issue all the time, but regardless of what we're doing,
Yeah.
this is always an issue when you're publishing.
So have you ever published a mixed method study just in one journal?
I have, and it was hard. And
Yeah.
we ended up spending more time on the quant than we did on the qual.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, the quant's nice, but I really would like to have some of these voices,
Mhm.
but but once again, that gets more into, as I mentioned, quantitative researchers tend to be more I'm sorry, mixed methods researchers tend to be more quantitative dominant. And so as reviewers see your mixed methods work, they tend to want to see more of the quantitative parts rather than the qualitative parts. They see the qualitative as more of the add-on part rather than the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so kind of building on that, you mentioned, well, critical race scholars generally tend to be more qualitative, and
Yes.
they focus on storytelling, which makes a whole lot of sense. But I think at some point during your presentation, you also talked about how you think it needs to go beyond just qualitative research. So
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit more about the flip side? Like why
Well,
quant? too.
I think because I think there are different ways of telling stories. And I think you can use numbers to tell stories as well. And I think that there's a really good article, of course, I'm forgetting the name of it, but by David Gilborn. He, and some others, and he wrote some stuff on quant crit. He talks about ways in which we can actually engage in quantitative CRT work, and he gives a lot total framework, but it's about the way in which you engage, and it's about being critical about the numbers. It's about how you present the numbers. And so I think we don't have to, so I don't think it's all in how we ask the research questions, all in how we run the analyses and how we interpret the data. And so I think we can do quantitative research with CRT, but it's how we do it. So I don't think we can go about business as usual with our traditional ways of using it. We have to do it in a different way. And that's what, David Gilborn and others are talking about with doing a quantitative perspective. And for me, the same goes for mixed methods. And so you still ask those questions in a critical way, but with the qualitative perspective, you can maybe make the qualitative component a lot more dominant, and then the quantitative kind of supports it, and then still do it in a more critical package. So I think, so it's maybe using the traditional methods, but all from a critical perspective.
So, we have a lot of students in the audience, as well as faculty too. But one of the things that I always hear when working with students, particularly, is that, well, first of all, qualitative research in and of itself is hard and it takes a lot of time to do it well. I also hear, that sometimes it might be easier to do a quantitative study. And then I'm also hearing from you that when you add the race perspective, the critical perspective, that's also hard. And, regardless of whether or not you're doing quant or qual,
Right.
because of, everything that goes. So like, what advice would you give students who are embarking on this journey or who are ultimately going to be responsible for coming up with a dissertation proposal? And also related to that, the different I don't know what the frameworks or the paradigms you have of mixed
Right.
methodologies. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you seen your students gravitate more toward one versus another, or have you given students that
Right.
advice about,
To add another layer of complexity about, I really am a pragmatist. I'm really am pragmatic. And so when I teach my mixed methods course, of course, I'm promoting mixed methods. But the first thing I tell students is that, you want to make sure your research design is as parsimonious as possible. And so if you can answer your questions using a singular design, I think you should go for it. I mean, I don't think you have to use a mixed methods design. If you're going to ask based upon your worldview, your inquiry worldview, and your positionality, you're going to ask whatever questions it is you're going to ask. All of that's going to influence what you want to ask. And then once you break that down, once you want to ask, we're going to figure out, well, what's the best methods to answer that question? And it might be quant, it might be qual, it might be a combination. And that's kind of the way we go. And I'm flexible. I could go, hey, I go any way you want to go. But we need to figure out which way that best answer those questions you want to ask. And what is your methodological knowledge? We need to ask questions that you can answer. So if you could only do a t-test, well, then that's the quant kind of question. You can only compare two groups, And so we need to be, you can't, you can't do something that's going to require some, structural equation modeling type, complicated thing. If that's the case, you're going to have to take more classes, which is fine, but you need to be, you have to commit to that. So I'm very, I'm pretty pragmatic in that perspective, that I'm open to whatever you want to do, but we need to make sure that methodologically you can actually do it and you're committed to it. But I'm also a realist in terms of, I understand students have timelines, and that if you need to get out in a year and a half, maybe we can't do that more complicated study, or maybe you collect all that data, but we only analyze so much of it for your dissertation, and you just keep the rest of it, and then you analyze it at a later date. And so, there are different things that we actually can do. But I do try to be cognizant of, the students, their interests and their needs, and just the reality of on the ground. Because, we do have to take in consideration that, are they going to be able to get access to the participants that they want to get access to?
right.
Yeah, because it took me months, I know it's been a long time, but it took me months to get access to my dissertation for people for my dissertation, because people did not want to let me come in and study race
Mhm.
in schools. I mean, I had, just school systems just shut the doors. Like, oh no, you can't come in. And I ended up going to a private school. I didn't want to go to a private school. I ended up going to a private school because that's the only school that would let me in. And it opened up a different door for me because I ended up, bringing in socioeconomic status as a major variable, when I had no idea and I had no intention of studying socioeconomic status.
Mm, mm.
And
Okay.
so that ended up being really interesting, but it wasn't planned.
I have a question from Dr. Ponerato, Dr. Joe Ponerato. He
Okay.
wants to know if you had a year's sabbatical to conduct a critical race theory mixed method study
Mhm.
at this time, what would it be?
Oh, wow. Wow. If I could get into a school, I really would like to kind of go into a school and do something more ethnographic
Hmm.
and kind of study a school. I want to study. My interest really is in adolescence, and so I would want to actually go maybe a middle school or high school and kind of study kind of what's going on there in schools and study issues of racial identity development, study some you know, academic identity, kind of look what's going on, maybe some kind of belonging, definitely some school context stuff, and maybe school history things. I might even want to recycle go back to maybe, I don't know if I want to do the independent school context or not, or the public school. I don't know. But the independent school real context really did bring up some interesting things. But I don't know if I would have the sample size to do the quantitative I would want to do because there's usually not enough Black students
Mm,
there.
mhm,
So
mhm,
I might, so I might have to step back and not, maybe do a series of so I wouldn't be able to do the ethnographic study then. But I would have to do but ethnographics tend to be more qualitative. But if I'm there, I can still do multiple surveys and I can do a variety of things. But yeah, but I would want to do something more long term and be in context for longer term. Students get accustomed to you being there. They see you, you get to kind of know them. I can get those rich stories, but at the same time, the principals and the teachers know me, so I could actually get access to, like, academic data. I could get access to, more of the quantitative stuff, and I could actually do that more mixed method kind of things.
mm.
Yeah.
That wouldn't that be nice
Wouldn't
to
that be really nice, man? I could see all the rich data. You can have test scores, you can have all this wonderful quant stuff that you get, you could do other kind of data.
yeah,
You
yeah,
can get parent stuff. I mean, all kind of interesting things.
yeah, yeah, no, I would love to do that too.
Yeah.
Um, there was a question in the chat about how do you deal with questions about objectivity as a person of color studying people of color?
Hmm. Objectivity. I don't really get that one too much. But I think that's why it's really important for you to kind of put your subjectivities out there and talk about who you are and kind of how you're actually, um, what your perspectives are and your experiences are and kind of your approach to looking at the data. Because I think that's really important to acknowledge, at least from a qualitative perspective, your subjectivities. But I think when you're doing quantitative analysis, I don't think it becomes as much of an issue because because you do acknowledge, how you're interpreting things, what, statistical analyses you're doing, what data packages you're using. So you're kind of, putting all those assumptions out there on the data. But I think that's why it's really important for you to put all those your subjectivities out there so they understand what you're bringing to your data and your whole study and how you may be what lens you're using to analyze that data. But I haven't received any questions about, you're not objective enough because of that. I think because but if you fail to disclose some of that information, I think that's when people might raise some questions.
Mm,
So I think it's really important in qualitative research that you put out the subjectivity. And that's why in mixed methods research, there's also a movement that we need to start putting more information about your subjectivity, your worldview, and information like as well, because, because of the qualitative component, how are you interpreting that data? So once again, we can't assume, everyone's kind of coming at mixed methods from this post-positive lens, and we can't just keep on doing that. We have to, you know, put our assumptions out there, put our subjectivities out there so that the reader understand how we're making our interpretations. So I think that's the next battle in the mixed methods arena.
What about, but I would say that that's equally important for quantitative methodologists.
Yeah, I think it is, but you don't see it happen very often. I don't really pick up very many articles and see that.
Oh, no, no, no. I'm not saying it happens, but
Right.
do you think that it's important for quantitative, in a quantitative research class, right? Like if you were gonna tell, like, I don't know, I feel like, I mean, this is my own question, but like, what I feel like making sure that students and faculty and researchers generally
Mhm,
are
right.
aware of their assumptions and the goals and all that stuff is really important, but it's hard to do that without um really reflecting on your positionality and also
Right.
what the purpose of your, but like we don't talk about those things in our quant classes normally. I think certain faculty members, depending upon their worldview, do a much better job of it. Dr. Ponerato, I think he does a great job of that. But most, faculty don't really focus on those when teaching quantitative statistics, which is probably maybe why, we don't see so much of that in our journals.
Right.
Um, but it's pretty easy to um, run an analysis that could lead to interpretations, like sort of like a deficit framing, right?
Right.
And so, I don't know, do you have an advice for both faculty as well as students who are conducting this work to, what sort of questions should we be asking ourselves?
Right. Well, I think that's a really good point. I think the whole idea that we teach students that just because it's quantitative is objective, and just
Mhm.
because it's quantitative is automatically representative. I mean, I think some of the ways that we have are normally kind of taught quantitative methods. I think that needs to just be challenged. Just because it's quantitative does not make it objective. What scale you use. I mean, you chose between 10 scales, for instance. There was a reasoning behind your choosing the scale you use. And then that brings up a lot of assumptions right there. And then what statistical package you use. I mean, there are a lot of assumptions there. And then, why did you choose to delete certain, I mean, all of these are decisions that you made that are very subjective. And
Right.
so we need to talk about all of that and how that kind of goes in the process. And then how did you do your groupings for your categories? And sometimes people categorize, people of color versus non, and so why did you do that? And what implications does that have? And those are the kind of conversations we need to have and let students know those are not objective. Those are very subjective decisions. At a very sense that you use the psychology pool. That's not reset representative. I mean, I'm nothing wrong with the psychology pool, because hey, we've all used the psychology pool, and I've been a member of the psychology pool, but this whole idea that because it's quantitative, it makes it representative, and if it's qualitative, it's not. So we need to kind of just change that whole thinking. And and the very fact that we still look at quantitative and qualitative research as just this dichotomy, and we just kind of need to change just the way that we look at those research approaches.
Yeah, no, totally. Um, Clarence Ball, he's one of our students, and he is asking, do you think that Black adolescents' perceptions of Black history affects their academic motivation?
Oh wow, the perceptions of Black history. I'm not sure the two are connected, but I do think um, I do think their perceptions of Black history. I think there's a perceptions of Black history. Their perceptions of the fact that they're not taught Black history in school or what they're taught in school, and then there is their motivation. I think the fact that they're not taught it in school
Mhm.
impacts their motivation because they're not seen in the curriculum,
Right.
and that impacts their motivation. Um, but I think, but I think a lot of students, once they do learn Black history, it does resonate with them. There's a sense of pride there. But I think the problem is that most schools don't really do a good job of integrating Black history or Latinx history or any of those histories into the curriculum.
Mhm.
But then it makes me think about Arizona that actually, banned, you know, um, ethnic studies, right? And so I think which has a negative impact on Latinx students' sense of motivation, particularly in Arizona. Um, so to answer that question, I think it's the lack of having Black history in schools actually impacts Black students' motivation.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that.
Yeah.
Um, so I I got asked this question recently at a conference. I know you both we have both attended, I don't think I had a good response to this, but it relates to so part of doing this work, and I think part of the reason why it's hard is that everyone is at different stages of their journey and their awareness of their biases and all that. And
Mhm.
then when you from a student's perspective, right, they are there's a power dynamic when it comes to working with a particular faculty member. And
Mhm.
so the question is essentially, how do you do this work when you're working with a faculty member who may not understand critical race theory, or
Right.
who may not be as on board, I guess, for lack of a better word, with this kind of work, despite the fact that you feel like it's really important.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, I was lucky. I had my mentor, my advisor was Paul Schutz, and he was a white male, and he was very open to what I was interested in learning, and he was really great. He was like, "Well, if I don't know it, I want you to go learn it and come teach it to me." So that was his perspective, and then if he didn't know it, he said, "Well, we need to get people on your committee that are experts in this area that know this stuff," and you know so you will be prepared, and you have the support that you need, because I know I don't know it and I don't know everything, but I want you to have all the people around you that do. So I had someone on my committee that was she was a counseling psychologist that did racial ethnic identity work, and I had a someone who's a historian, education historian, that did civil rights kind of work. And then I had that we had to have we had to have X amount of ed psych people. So I had to have those people. I had somebody did identity work from an ed psych perspective, and then I had a qualitative person on there. So I had people, on my committee that did the work in the areas that he did not know. So I had that support. So I think it's important for you to go out and find people in the university community that can be on your committee to give you that support that you need. Um, and I think and then hopefully your chair will be at least open to you doing something that's a little different. Or at least open to, and if that person can't chair you, hopefully you don't get to that point, but you might have to find a new chair. If they're just really like, if they're open, it depends on their perspective. If they're like, well, I don't really do that, but I'm open to you doing it. Let's figure out how we can make this work. Then you just can maybe find the people to get you to support you. But if that person is like, oh no, that's not what I do. If you can't do what I do, then maybe you need to go ahead and find you somebody else to support you. Because at the end of the day, um, when you graduate, you're going to be hired in for whatever position based upon that expertise that you're bringing, and you don't necessarily have the luxury to say, well, oh, I'll learn how to do something else later. I'll do something else later. This is the time you need to be developing the roots of whatever it is you're going to do. You don't want to say, well, I'll learn how to do CRT later. I mean, that's easier said than done. It's by saying I'm gonna learn how to do whatever it is. And so it's easy. So you need to start learning how to do that stuff now and reading those foundational pieces now. It's much easier to read and learn the information, whatever it is now as a doctoral student, than it will ever be once you get in the field and get a job. Because you just won't have the time to read the way you have now. So I would highly recommend that you try to find the most supportive committee that you can find. the most supportive chair that you can find. And then, you may need to make that most difficult, decision of switching chairs, but you may be able to just work with the person you have, even though they don't have the expertise. It may just be about crafting, a really supportive committee with other people that can really help you out.
Mhm. Yep. I mean, both you and I were lucky with our mentors.
Yeah, yeah.
I think both of our mentors fully acknowledged that this was not their expertise, but they were
Right.
open to,
Open and
yeah.
supportive. Yeah. And I think in the long run, they wanted to learn about it. And they're like, oh,
Mhm.
that's pretty cool, and they wanted to learn and know more.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of chair you will want, that even if they don't know it, they want to learn more because they don't know long term, they're going to get more and more students. They're going to want to do different things, and they're going to have to be open to that as a chair.
But now as a dean, I do worry about my faculty of color, or especially those faculty who have this expertise and being
Mhm.
overburdened.
Yes.
Any advice for them?
Oh yes, you can be asked to be on a little too many committees. I can attest to that. But I think what happens is that you as an individual have to decide what you're willing to say yes and what you're willing to say no to. Particularly for students, I tend to prefer this if students have taken a class with me.
Mm.
That way I've gotten a chance to know them. I know their work, I know their work habits and things like that. And so I think it makes it easier for you to say yes or no. You can say, well, this person was a good student. I worked with them. I knew what they were working on. And then, I could say either say yes or no. But if it's a student that just kind of, hey, I know you do this work. Can you be on my committee? Like, I don't know. I don't know you. And so my saying no to that person isn't as difficult because I don't know them.
Mhm.
They never took a class with me. And another thing was easier for me. A lot of students took my mixed methods course. And so we did a proposal in the course. And so by the time they asked, could I be on their committee? I already saw the beginnings of their work anyway. And so I already kind of helped them shape a lot of their work. So I'm not saying I didn't have to read their work, but when I went to read it, I already knew a lot about what it was about because I helped them to do a good bit of their work anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was a little easy from that part, but definitely, don't be afraid to say no and say yes to the work, to yes to the students that you really would want to be a part of their committees.
Yeah. Do you say yes to students who generally do work more aligned with yours, and like in terms of the content area?
You talking about committees or like my own
No,
committees?
committees.
Oh, I say yes to a lot of different ones. But sometimes I just find it just interesting. Like, wow, it's interesting. But I tend to, but also, if they're taking my class, if they're really good students. Like if I knew they're a good student, they're a good writer, and I understood their topic, and yeah, I support that student. Or sometimes it's that student, and I know their chair, and like their chair kind of did a favor for me.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's like that. Like
Yeah.
I had a student last week. She asked me to be in her committee. She took one of my classes some time back. So it's been a while since I've talked to her, but I'm supportive of the student. But I mean, I'm really good friends with her chair, and so I was like, "Oh, okay, I have to do it more so for her chair." But she's a good student too. And then she works with the McNair program, and I was a McNair scholar, so I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm going to support the McNair program. So sometimes it's also kind of what I'm connected to.
Mhm.
I don't want to not support McNair because McNair supported me,
Yeah.
uh, years ago.
Yeah. No, it's a great program.
Yeah.
I know our time is coming to an end, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to say a little bit more about that conference that you're at. So, I mean, for those of you who are really interested in learning more about improving your research methodologies, as Dr. DeClear Gumby said, seek out all the opportunities you can to expand on your research. And one opportunity that's coming up this Wednesday is our student-wide research conference, which is
this Wednesday, the 21st, from 5 to 8 p.m. We're speaking, giving voice. Actually, and let me just throw this into the chat here. So I would recommend that everyone, if you haven't signed up, go to here. But I also know that Dr. Queer Gumby is a featured speaker at an upcoming conference this summer on research methodologies. And so, do you have information? I should have prepared.
Yeah, look, I posted, put the
Oh,
link
great.
in there. But it's the Advanced Methods Institute, Advancing Culturally Responsive Research and Researchers is at Ohio State. They have a so it's going to be virtual, and so it's going to be all really great speakers. That have qualitative speakers, quantitative, and mixed methods. I'm going to be speaking about mixed methods, but you know, definitely check it out. It's going to be really good. A lot of really great people going to be there talking about a lot of really great things. And so what's been a really good, I think, side effect of COVID is that there's been really great virtual conference and speaker series. I know the AMI Institute, um, uh, they did another little speaker series, or Ohio State rather, they did another little speaker series early in this semester on diversity and methods. And so you start seeing these popping up all over. And so they make them virtual and people kind of join in. Some of them have been free, some have been pretty cost effective. And so I think it's really made, you know, really learning, you know, reaching out to a variety of people really easy. Where in the past, that you know, they'll have a conference and only a few people can go, but now, like, you know, now they're kind of putting knowledge out there, and everybody can just jump on their computers and attend.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think it's really great. And so I think that's been one really good thing that came out with the pandemic.
Well, it certainly has worked to our favor to have you here tonight, and we are so super grateful for that. And thank you for being here tonight and sharing all of your experiences and your practical advice for our students and our faculty. Um, uh, any last questions? Just given due wait time, but I know we barely have any time left. But I will say we will make sure that that this recording is available, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully, some of you guys have seen the links in the chat and the references in the chat. I need to read some of these myself, so maybe we could figure out ways in which we can do it together. But thank you again, Jessica. It's always good to see you, and hopefully I'll get to see you soon in person, and we could, you know, catch up.
All right. Thank you so much for the invitation. And you know, like I said, if you have any questions, just a comment, just please send them to me. I'll be more than willing, happy to send it to you all. And I could send you some references. You know, as I mentioned, for critical race theory, that
Yeah.
that way you can kind of maybe send it to everyone. That might make it a little easier.
That would be great. And any other, you know, organizations or places out there that we could, because, you know, as much as I'm very proud of the courses that we have at Fordham, I think, you know, we could always use other perspectives as well. So.
Okay, I think there's one more I want to at least put in the chat is ICQ.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
ICQCM Institute in Critical, Quantitative, and Computational and Mixed Methodologies. And so I know that they have some events and trainings, and they had a conference, I want to say earlier in last August, and then they had all sorts of people talking about different methodological topics. So I don't know if they're going to do another one, but I just put the link in there, so if you can take a look and see kind of what's going on, there might be something interesting happening.
Yeah. I think that would be great. So thank you again. Thank you all who, I know I can't see you, but thank you for all of you who have attended, and we'll be in touch with all the additional resources and the video.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good evening.
Have a good evening too.